All right, welcome everyone to our live broadcast. We are here with author Jon Heymann, and we will be speaking about his book today, which is, let me make sure I've got the title right, Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences. So
Correct.
This is a live interview. You can ask questions during the broadcast. If you're with us on Zoom, you can post your questions in the chat or raise your hand. And if you're joining us on social media, you can type those questions in the comments and I will collect those as they come in. We'll start off with some questions that we have prepared. I hope that you enjoy this interview. It's a very inspiring story, and I will turn things over to Father Chris to get us started.
Thank you, Noelle. Welcome, everyone. Especially welcome our special guest this evening, Jon Heymann. Let's talk a little bit about him. First of all, he was born in poverty. He was trafficked as a child slave overseas, adopted as a young boy into an American family. He's been a pastor, a counselor, a college instructor, and a nonprofit CEO, and even sold large construction equipment. I want to learn about that. The husband, a father of three, a grandfather of a growing number, as well as a prolific writer and speaker. His book, Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences, discusses struggling to connect with God during difficult times and finding true peace after trauma. Jon, welcome. Nice to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Father Chris. I appreciate it. And thank you for everybody who's joined via Zoom or YouTube or Facebook, however you're linking with us this evening.
Great. I've read the book, and I have to tell you, I couldn't put it down. I just kept going through it and going through it and going through it. But before we get into the actual book, I think we should ask some questions about you, about your story. What inspired you to write Agonizing Peace with a question mark?
Well, I'll tell you, Father Chris, I should have written a children's book because this was a really tough book to write. Very tough because it's highly emotional. If you've read it, of course, you said you did. You've seen some of the stuff I've talked about. All of those are either firsthand experiences that I've had myself, or I have literally witnessed myself. I didn't pick these out of the air, except for things about Corrie ten Boom or Viktor Frankl. So some of them are really tough. Some are tough to read. They were tough to write. Some I actually said in the book. I won't go into the details because it gets pretty gruesome. And yet some of the folks that have lived through some of the things I talked about in the book have come out amazingly healthy, with peace with God, with themselves, and with others, even though the trauma still hurts. So what made me write it? Thinking about, for years, my early childhood experience and my wife constantly saying, honey, you need to tell your story. You need to tell it for your own kids, for the grandchildren, for everybody. You need to tell your story. And so I started to write. But it wasn't until this last year when I truly left the nonprofit world, wonderful organizations that I've had the privilege to be a part of. I left that and I spent full time from May till September taking all the notes I had written from about 15 years and putting them together in this book. It really was, I have to say, God inspired, because I've never written anything like this before in my life. So to write something that's about 150 pages long, it's not a very long book, but I think it's pointed and I think it's poignant. And so what made me write it was my early childhood experiences, questions about why was I abandoned? Why was I abused? Who would have done this to a child, to many children? And by the way, let me say up front, even though this happened in Athens, Greece, I'm not angry with the nation of Greece or with Greeks. In fact, I am very proud of my heritage. My Greek name is Pondelaimon Koudinos. I still know it. My parents never hid it from me when I got adopted. They were proud I was Greek, even though neither one of them are Greek. And so I wanted you all to know that Greece has a very special place in my heart. My whole family went over a few years ago to visit. We were not over there for a soul-searching experience. However, it turned into that when we actually found the asylum that I was dumped off at. It's still there. It's not called the Athens Municipal Infant Asylum. It's not called that anymore. And in the book, I describe where it is, what it looks like, and how tough it was, how literally tough it was for me to walk in the building that looked exactly like it did when I was a kid.
John,
So that's what inspired me to write the book.
let's speak a little bit about that experience, about why you went to the asylum, what happened at the asylum, because I know as I was reading the book, you went back in there and you, I guess, got to go through all that stuff, filming it, seeing it in your mind once again, unpacking that experience. But if it's not too painful, I think it'd be helpful for people to know what happened in Greece at that point that you wound up there at that asylum.
Yeah. Well, in walking through it just a few years ago, about 10 years ago now, well, 8 or 9 years ago now, it's an art museum. It's a municipal art museum now, which means they usually have sculptures and paintings all over the walls. But when my wife and I knocked on the door and a young lady came to the door and said, "We don't have any exhibition on right now," Cheryl, my wife, said, "He was born here." Now, technically, I wasn't born there, but that's what she said. An older lady came around the door, huge wooden door, pulled us in. There were people behind us waiting to get in, pulled us in and closed the door on the people behind us and said, very quickly, "Walk around," just like that. Well, it was empty. So it looked just like it did when I was a kid. It would have looked very different had there been sculptures or paintings or an exhibition of some kind in the hallways, up the stairway, which I clearly remember, and the rooms upstairs. It would have looked very different, but it didn't. It looked just like I did. And I'm telling you, I get tingles when I tell that story. I am right now. But what happened was this. They would dump, this was post-World War II.
Yeah, that's
a number of years afterwards, yeah. Hitler had, in World War II, had conquered Greece. Mussolini couldn't do it. Hitler did, but in an odd, strange way, in most countries that he went in, he would destroy some of their best temples and buildings. He didn't do that to the Parthenon. He raised the Greek flag, but didn't destroy the Parthenon. It had been destroyed generations before that, but not under Hitler. I'm not praising him, by the way, but I'm glad he didn't destroy it. So about 10 blocks away from the Acropolis, the famous building that the Parthenon sits on top of, is the building I'm talking about, the Athens Municipal Infant Asylum. And when I did research on it, because remember, I was adopted. My adoptive parents have never seen this. They've only heard stories about it from Dr. Spiros Odiatis, who was full-blooded Greek, who did a lot of translation of the New Testament. He ran a mission called the American Mission of the Greeks. Anyhow, when I saw it, when I saw what I saw, it was alarming and it was shocking, and it made me, quite frankly, sad and nervous and shaking a little bit. I even told my wife to stop taking pictures. I kind of wish I didn't tell her that. I wish I had more pictures of the inside, but I have them all. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, it was an alarming experience to then be rented or sold to somebody outside the building when I was old enough to beg. If any of you have ever seen Slumdog Millionaire, you know what I'm talking about. It took me 2 years to watch that movie after it came out. I didn't want to watch it. And but I used to beg up on the Parthenon. We had a group of young children. We knew how to steal. We knew how to kick people's ankles and try to grab their wallets and run as fast as we could. Remember, we knew the terrain. The tourists didn't. So if you spoke to somebody and they couldn't understand you, you knew they were a tourist. Those were the ones we went after. We also took rubble and tried to sell it because, of course, from way back then to today, you're not allowed to touch anything. You're not allowed to pick up anything. You'll get arrested because it has so much historical value to the country of Greece. The Parthenon does. So you're not allowed to pick up anything, but you're allowed to tour the site. So that's what I would do during the day if I didn't apparently bring back enough money or rubble or whatever. I was beat up. I was thrown out a window, that I clearly remember. I remember 2 people that lived in this very, very small house. I'll describe that in a second. I don't know who they were. They have no faces in my memory. When a TV station did a short documentary, and it's still on YouTube, did a short documentary on me, which is called I Don't Want Kids to Hurt, on First Coast News. It's about a 6-minute documentary. That person looked at all the documents that I have to make sure I wasn't exaggerating my resume. And one of the things that she noticed was the picture of the doctor that we were told when we visited about 8 years ago. We were told he was the one that signed the death certificates. I had never heard this part of my story.
You really have to key in on this because Those of you that are watching and listening, listen very, very carefully to what Jon is going to explain right now.
Yeah. So first, the babies were dumped off there by people who either lived in poverty, couldn't afford to keep us anymore, knew that we would be fed there, dumped us off in a bread box, which looks like a big mail slot, except it was big enough to put bread and milk and food in. They would also dump babies in. So we were called bread box babies. New York Times actually did a story on us. I couldn't find it recently. I think it was 1996, called bread box babies. Anyhow, so in looking at all of that, even Channel 12 News, when they did the documentary, said, "This doctor did what?" And I said, "I was told by the older lady." She opened up the book, which I still have. I have 2 copies of it. Opened up the book and said, "This is the doctor." And I said, "What doctor?" And she said, "The doctor that signed your death certificate." I said, "What?" And she said, "That way, if anybody came back to claim you, you know, a mom or somebody came back and said, 'We dropped a baby off here 6 months ago,' they would say, 'We're so sorry, but the baby is dead.' And then once you are dead, they can do anything with you they want," which is what they did. And so my memories are not good of that place. It's not good of that tiny house. In fact, if you don't mind me explain a little bit more, most people, when they say, "Oh, I can remember back when I was 2 and 3 years old," technically is probably not very accurate, because when you remember back that young, you're very small. I call it knee-high memory. So your memories are exaggerated.
Right.
So most of our memories, for most people, are built up of real memories, plus stories that were told, plus pictures that were taken. Those are the 3 main things that create our memory bank when we're under 4 years old. Well, I didn't have 2 of those things. I didn't have pictures, and I didn't have people telling me stories, real live stories. So I just had my memories, and they weren't good. They were knee-high, but they weren't good. I mean, I remember being up on the Parthenon. I remember kicking people in the ankle. I remember reaching for them, but my memories are they were big people, because they were in my memory. Now, in Slumdog Millionaire, they cut off the digits, the fingers, or parts of them, and they would smash the knees of the children to make them look poorer than they really were. I don't have any smashed knees, and I have no cut fingers.
Thank God for that.
Means I knew how to raise money back then. That was survival for me. But seriously, I must have done pretty well, except for the physical beatings. They did ask me about sexual abuse, and I explain in the book the power of the mind to forget some of the most traumatic experiences of your life. So I don't have any experience. I don't have any memories of sexual abuse. If it happened, I wouldn't be surprised. But I have no memory, and I thank God for that.
All right, very good. You also say another very unique story. I don't think it would happen in today's world, when your blessed parents who adopted you in the United States of America, and you and your sister, or it could have been someone who they made to be your sister at the time, was put in a basket, and she was in a seat next to you as you flew across the Atlantic. Could you unpack that for us? I got a ton of questions, and I'm sure other people have questions too.
Well,
I'd like to learn about that experience.
We have all the receipts. So we see the receipt. And of course, my mom, Mrs. Heymann, Lois Heymann, who worked with that organization, American Mission of the Greeks, once asked Spiros Zodhiates, "We're sending food over there." When I say work, she volunteered. "We're sending food over to the children. Why don't we just adopt some?" And he turned to her and said, "Will you be the first?" And she was. And I was the first one. My sister, a little girl who became my sister, she's not my blood sister as far as we know. She has a totally different Greek name. She was the one that was in the basket next to me on the plane. My parents paid for someone to accompany us. That person never accompanied us. We were 2 little children all by ourselves. And from what we learned from Spiros Zodhiates, a lot of illegal things were going on over there on that side of it. But God blessed on this side, I'll tell you, because I see the remarks and not the emails, the actual letters sent from a U.S. congressman telling the Heymans, my parents, telling the Heymans that they could not adopt because they already had a natural born child. And they kept pleading and praying and prodding, and it worked. And I was blessed to be one of the first of 60 in the batch that came over.
It's incredible. It's an incredible story. The book, of course, is written from your perspective as a person who believes in God. And I would have to say that if God wasn't there in your life, I don't know if you would have made it to where you are today. Will this book still be relevant, though, to someone who doesn't share your belief, who comes from a different faith background, if you will?
Yeah, I think so. Now, there's going to be Bible verses in it. There are Bible verses in it. And so if somebody says, I don't believe in God, will this book still help me? Yeah, that we deal with depression. We deal with different kinds of struggles that people have, both mental and physical. We deal with physical disabilities. Why does God allow that? There's a whole lot of things that are discussed there that even a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counselor that says, well, I don't bring God into my practice. That's fine. You'll have a lot of suggestions on how to help people through the book. So yes, even if, when you think about it, if you have no belief in God, which is a lot of people, you have no belief in God, recognize this, what I believe is true, and that is when you have questions, deep questions that arise out of traumatic experiences, without God, you have no answers. You may be angry at God, the very God you deny exists. You may be angry at God. However, you have no answers. With God, you have only some of the answers. We don't have all of them. I don't have all of them. Even the Apostle Paul said, we look through a glass darkly. So we don't know everything about God. In fact, in the book, I believe I repeat it 3 times. If we knew everything about God, he wouldn't be much of a God.
Right.
Because I don't even know everything about my cat, about my kids, sometimes about my wife. They all surprise me. So I like that part of God that we don't know everything about. I am frustrated at times not having answers to my questions, and I get that because I'm as frustrated as many people who've gone through. Even in my experience, I have questions. Why me and not anyone else? They call it survivor's guilt.
Right.
Why did I make it and not other kids or more kids? Why aren't kids today delivered from the child trafficking that seems to be rampant today? I don't have a clear answer to that. But those who deny God clearly have no answers to it. We work to stop it, but we have no answers to why. Why are people so evil sometimes to children? I say in the book, and I'll repeat it here, hope you don't mind the language, there's a special place in hell for people that do this to children, because Jesus said there was.
Yeah.
And he also said there's a special place in heaven for the children that suffer. He said, suffer the children to come to me because the kingdom of God is theirs. So anyhow, you can tell I'm passionate about the whole issue.
No. Those are good things. I'm reminded of a story of an elder in a monastery. A young man would come to him and question, why is God doing this? And why is this happening? And why is that? We don't really need God. And he said, come with me. He took him down to this river and he took him by the hair and he started putting his head into the water. And he brought him back up. He said, can you breathe? He said, yeah, so far so good. So he put him down again. Bring him up. Can you breathe? Yeah. Then he put him down and he held him down there. And he said, what did you want most when you were under the water, when he brought him up? He said, I wanted to breathe. He said, well, when you want God as much as you wanted to breathe underwater, you will understand the importance of God in your life. That is so, so true. We get pushed underwater. And as you unpack in this very good book, there are times when we have to realize it's really God is in control and that the difficulties, they're a part of life. Life was not meant to be roses, unfortunately. That's just the way it is. Noel, I'm sure we have some questions from guests. You want to go to those? You want me to keep going with Jon?
It's up to you. I've added all the questions we have so far at the end. So it's up to you whether or not you want to jump back and forth.
All right. Now we're looking at questions. We're not looking at statements here, right? Okay. Let's go to this question here, Jon, for you. Were you exposed to Christianity at all during your lifetime in Greece?
No, absolutely not. Not until I was adopted. Brought up in a Lutheran church up in New Jersey and came to know Jesus as my Savior somewhere around 9 years old. It was 9 years old. Okay. So, yeah.
Very good. Let's see. There's another question here, but I'd rather do this. Let's ask this question, Jon. What did you learn on your journey about the nature of suffering? And how were you able to personally reconcile that with God? I mean, you went through a little bit of it, but let's go a little deeper into it if we can.
Yeah. I think there's 4 different ways that we can react to traumatic experiences in our life, no matter what they are. A soldier not returning back from war, a child that dies clearly prematurely. In fact, I tell a couple stories in the book about that. Actually, I don't identify the one woman with the adoptive child or the child she wanted to adopt. It didn't work out, and she was sent back to her parents, and she died. Misjudgment of the judge, crack baby. There's things that were beyond this child's control that she should have not perished. Well, that woman is my daughter. And I wasn't sure she wanted me to include all those details. She said, Dad, you could have done that. Well, it's a heart-wrenching story because what she writes 11 years later, Jonave would have been 17 years old right now, that life went on. So Jonave was part of the past, the then, she calls it, but not part of the now. That all of the children that she adopted, she's adopted 4, has 1 natural born, and Jonave never had a chance to be adopted. So that heart-wrenching, in fact, when I was going over it this afternoon, it was bringing tears to my eyes. I said, I hope I don't break down when I tell the story because I love my daughter and we loved Jonave so much. And any of you who have gone through the experience of a child passing away, we're not made to bury our children.
Not
at all. And if you want to really see people's reactions to God and mesh the traumatic experience with peace with God, and let's go back just for a second, meshing that peace with God goes back to Jesus agonizing in the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing he was going to be tortured. And the word agony is there. He agonized. He sweat drops of blood, hematidrosis. The capillaries burst and blood came out from his skin. That's how much he agonized. But the ultimate question is, was he at peace? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But it was agonizing peace. And that's not the peace we teach sometimes. We teach a peace that sighs a sigh of relief and says, I'm at peace with this. And by the way, that's good peace. Nothing wrong with that peace. I wish we had more of it. But there is agonizing peace in our world. And it's still peace. And that's having the trauma come in conflict with our faith in God. And it's not easy. So you look at the 4 reactions, and that is simply this. If you don't believe in God, you got 2 options when a trauma happens. You either get angry with God, the very God you said doesn't exist. You get angry with God, and it drives you further away from a belief in God. Or you drop at the knees of at the cross. One or the other happens.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen. And I'm sure you have too, Father Chris, and maybe some others who are listening. Now, if you do believe in God, there's 2 reactions to a traumatic experience. One is it drives you further away from God. The same one as an atheist would have. Or the second, same one. It drives you to the foot of the cross. One of the 2 reactions.
It's one of the 2, yeah.
It really is. And it really does become a heart decision and a faith decision. It really does. And it alters the way you live the rest of your life. Because I do tell a story where a child died in our church up in Rhode Island, and that marriage broke up. She went and lived real wild, and he struggled to try to continue to live for God. So different reactions that people have, because Carl Jung said between a stimulus, so what happens to us, between a stimulus and a response, there's a choice. That's brilliant. There's a choice between what happens to us and how we respond. So,
Jon, let me ask you this. In addition, we know, of course, there are the tools of therapy, recovering. It can take a lot of personal work, as you've said, the mental, spiritual. Can you talk about your experience and what advice you will offer to others who are experiencing a real despair in their lives? Because your situation could have gone very, very sour. And you could have, even though you were adopted and brought to the United States with that young woman that young girl who was your so-called sister in a basket,
Right.
things could have gone very negative for you. So how could we help others who are going through despair?
Well, human beings are a product of reproduction. Children are a product of love. There's a difference. So when somebody says, you're a child of who, John? The Heymans. Because I wasn't loved by anybody else. I was loved by the Heymans. So that's who I'm a child of. I may not be a human being from them, but I'm a child of theirs. I couldn't hug anybody for 2 to 3 years. And my family is a very hugging family. I wouldn't let them touch me because when adults touched me, they hurt me. And so I didn't want anybody to touch me. And I described those feelings and how long it took and what it felt like the first time with my arms straight against my side. I let Mrs. Lois Heymann hug me for the first time in the kitchen in Teaneck, New Jersey. It wasn't easy because I expected to be beat up, but I wasn't. I had spent 2 years being loved by them before I let them hug me. I couldn't read until I was in 3rd grade. I did lose the Greek language. I wish that had never happened, but it did. Because nobody spoke it around me. So that I wish I had not lost, but I couldn't read until I was in 3rd grade. So there were a lot of extenuating circumstances. I talk about the traumatic nightmares I had till I was 10 years old, because these kind of things don't leave children very quickly, no matter how much they're loved. But you did ask, what do you do? Well, first of all, you love. You love. Your job, if you have somebody in your family, or if it's you, here's your job in 2 words: be there. That's it. Be available to the person that's hurting. Give them a hug. Somebody called me and said, my son is doing this and that, and it's very destructive and could be self-destructive. What do I do? And I said, be there. Be there. Number 2, don't act like you know exactly what they're going through, because you probably don't unless you went through exactly what they're going through. So don't act like it because they know you don't know. But if you hug them and love them, if they're far distance, you tell them, I wish I could hug you through the FaceTime or the Skype or whatever you use when you're talking to them. Sometimes it's on the phone because they don't want you to see their face. Be there. Don't act like you know exactly what they're going through. And then refer them to a professional. You're not a professional. And just like a coach or a teacher, for those of you who have children, you're going to know what I'm talking about. Your children will sometimes come home after a day and say, guess what my coach told me? And they tell you what the coach told them. And you say to yourself, I told you that 300 times. Or a teacher or a youth pastor, I've told you that 300 times. Same thing. One of the best reasons to send them for professional help if they need it, if they believe they need it, is that that professional will give them advice that perhaps you've given them 300 times, but it's coming somebody that has a whole bunch of degrees behind their name. And sometimes your children, your sister, your mom will trust them just a little bit more, but also verifies the words that you have been saying. So be there, be there, be there.
Okay. Well, that's very, very true. And we know that things have changed in society today. We've spoken about it before on these programs, where society has changed, where everyone used to have a porch in the front of their house and everyone used to talk and watch what was going on. And if one of the kids stepped out of line, Aunt Bessie or Uncle Charlie would step in and help out. Then we got sophisticated, when we went to homes with porches in the backyard. And then we got even more sophisticated. We put up fences, and more sophisticated, and the carports became garages with electric doors, and it went down and you're really sealed off. And that's not a way to raise someone. That's not a way to build community, as you've said. It's a matter of reaching out, being there, listening. And if somebody needs help, for goodness sake, help them out. Before we go to the issue of peace, because I know you speak about peace a lot in your book, I want to go back to maybe some of the questions that we have here. There's a question here about those who are interested in telling their own stories. Can you explain how you went through getting yours published? How did you find a publisher, and what percentage of sales come to you? I don't know if that's a question for you right now, but maybe you can briefly address that.
Yeah, I don't mind addressing that at all. I get
Okay.
30% of the sales.
Okay.
This is now, if you buy it over Amazon, they take 50, the publisher. So the remaining 50 gets split 70 to the publisher, 30 to me. You would say, why isn't it more to you, John? Because this is a traditional publisher. This is not a self-publishing. So you don't pay to have it published. Remember, with self-publishing, most of those self-publishing companies will publish just about anything and give you no guarantee that it will sell. A traditional publisher has to take some risk, because if they don't sell anything, they don't make any money. I don't lose any money. They don't make any money. So I get 30%. Kharis is the publisher. They came to me, and honest to goodness, I don't know where they saw it. I really mean that. I'm not trying to be falsely humble here. My wife and I, I'm quite an accomplished speaker. I enjoy speaking at conferences, men's retreats, churches, things like that. I really love it. I believe that's the main gift God has given to me. But when we were looking, after I had left the nonprofit world back in May, which I had had a wonderful career with nonprofits, secular nonprofit, just fantastic career, loved it, and I miss it. But I decided to finish this book. My wife and I put out on the dining room table, do you want to speak or do you want to write? And I said, I think I want to speak. So we put the writing actually aside, even though I had completed the book. We put it aside, and we're going to go after speaking gigs, speaking engagements. And then we were up north visiting family, and I get an email at 10:30 at night from Kharis, Kharis. And they said, we want to pick up your book. We are a traditional publisher, blah, blah, blah. They explained the difference. I knew the difference, but they explained it. And that's who I went with. So I honestly don't know how they did it, but I will say this. I put my book out to a lot of publishers, a lot. The biggies like Zondervan. So that's what I did. You can try to find agents on the internet, pitch your book to them. You know, it's always done in writing. A couple want hard copy. They don't want it by email. They have a boatload of questions. They want it. These are some of them that you have to be prepared to answer. What other books are like your book? And what makes your book unique? You have to answer that. And you better have read something in the genre or the area of what you're talking about. So mine was, why do bad things happen to good people? There's a lot of books out there about that. What was my niche? My niche was the subject of peace. And I took it from Jesus's prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, and from nobody, from what I know, nobody else has done that. And Kharis believed it, and it's already published. So, yeah.
And if people want to get a copy of your book, how do they do that?
KharisPublishing.com. I'm actually the featured author on there right now. Kharis is Kharis, KharisPublishing.com.
Very good. Very good.
It's on Amazon, but only on Kindle right now.
In Kindle. Okay. Let's go back. There's another question here, going back to the subject of trauma. What do I do if I feel resentment about the trauma that I went through? Because everyone just expects me to just move on. You brushed on that a little bit. Can you go a little more depth into that?
Wow, that's a great question. It is one of the main reasons I wrote the book, is that question you just asked. Let me say it this way. I believe Mahatma Gandhi once said, I like your Christ. I don't like your Christianity. Yeah. And what he meant by that when he described it is he didn't like Christians. He didn't like the way they acted. He didn't like their pompousness. He didn't like their shallow answers to tough questions. And what that questioner just asked was, I think, I'm going to surmise, is one of the reasons I wrote the book. And that was, this book was not written for the theologians or for the psychologists, written for the layman who's been jilted, who's been put off by other Christians in reaction to something tough that has gone on in their life. They've been given shallow answers. They've been given superficial answers by Christians in the church. Now, it could be those Christians didn't know what else to say. So I wouldn't hate them, but it does turn you off when you hear things like, well, maybe you don't have enough faith. Wow. Or maybe you have sinned and not confessed it. Really? You're going to judge me that way? You know, maybe your child died because of something you did. You did. And there's always, it's like guilt and blame. And what a sad thing. The church should be a place of healing balm, not a bomb. If you know what I mean, like a dynamite bomb that blows you up, and you don't want to be in church anymore. And you start to agree with Gandhi. I like Christ, but I don't like the Christians. And so it doesn't take the pain away from the traumatic experience, but it clearly explains it a little bit better when you realize you are probably 99% not to blame for what happened to you.
Right. Okay. Well, there is one person that wants to ask the question out loud. Her name is Jackie, and let's see if we can open up her microphone. Is that Jackie Catherine?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jackie.
My real name, I'm Jackie Catherine Morphosis. I'm Greek American. Thank you so much, Mr. Heymann, for your testimony. Thank you, Father Christopher. Thank you, Noel, everyone. I just want to say one thing, Mr. Heymann, you are for me, Luke 21:13. It will be an opportunity for your testimony. Your life has become your testimony, and thank you. I wanted to share something about my life.
Is it a question, Jackie? Are you
Yes, sir. It is framed as a question on turning trauma to testimony.
Okay.
And I would like to share this for everyone. I had more than one trauma. But I want to show trauma to testimony, and then I'll ask the question. I was living in a home. It was gasoline. We were poured with gasoline when we were sleeping, and we were set on fire. We fell from the second-story balcony into the bushes before the house blew up. But in that trauma, prior to the explosion, I felt the presence of my soul, and I felt the Lord was with me in the darkness, in the smoke, in the choking. And I actually was calm. Like you said, Mr. Heymann, I was calm. I was at peace, even in the midst of crisis. And I just said, Lord, take me. My housemate screamed. I opened the door to the balcony, and then we left. The second trauma is the one that really applies more to this conversation. I've also done outreach with children at orphanage in Greece and prison work. I have a heart for the wounded, but I was wounded. I was brutally assaulted. And I replayed the trauma in my life almost every day. It was as if the demonic and the adverse powers, Father Christopher, knew the wound was a portal to reattack me.
Sure.
In other words, there was a wound that was my vulnerability, and the darkness and the adverse powers, like legions of demons, came and reattacked me, as they do to people that have trauma. So it's a repetition of the trauma. Yes. And I went to a counselor. I went to so many people for help, as you say. And I went to a priest. And this is what he said. You can choose to forgive. He didn't say you have to forgive. He didn't guilt me. He didn't pressure me like everyone else did, even the priests. He said, you can choose to forgive. That night, in front of my icon, in front of my cross, with my own will, I re-empowered myself, and I chose to forgive. And when I forgave, not only did I forgive, but I prayed for him. Yes. I prayed for him. And in the moment that I prayed, let me tell you, a wall came down. A wall came down from God. And I can only go to Zechariah 2:5, where it says, the Lord will be unto her a wall of fire about her, and will be the glory. I will be the glory in the midst of her. He brought a wall of fire. Do you know I can't see it anymore? It has been washed. It has been delivered. I've had a deliverance ministry upon me. Through the prayer of forgiveness and praying for this man, God brought a wall down. So all I want to say is I agree with you that there are traumas that will linger for a lifetime till we're in the arms of the Lord. But there is also the possibility of full deliverance, where God will bring a wall of fire down. I couldn't share my story in public until he brought the wall.
Very good. Wow, that's quite a story. Thank you, Jackie, for sharing that. Do you have a specific question that you'd like to ask?
So the question is, as Orthodox or just Christians or as spiritual comforters to others, how can we use the language, as you say, of acceptance and not judgment, to lead people to the place where they can prepare themselves to expect the miraculous?
Beautiful. Great question. John?
Yeah, that's a great question. The miraculous will be visited upon a number of people. If you do a study of the New Testament, the times that Jesus healed, sometimes he healed because of their own faith. Sometimes he healed somebody because of somebody else's faith. like a father, but he didn't heal. And that's a tough one.
Yeah.
So the advice I would give may sound superficial, but remember, I may be talking to people that don't believe in God, that don't believe in the Bible. Say, here's my 3 suggestions. Believe in the cheerleaders of your life, believe in the basketball, and believe in the rearview mirror. Let me please explain those, because with or without God, this is real. Number 1, every sport has somebody watching the game. There are cheerleaders on this side and there are cheerleaders on this side. They may not wear a cheerleading outfit. It may be the mother of one of the players on the court or on the field. But people that have traumatic experiences tend to sometimes believe those that want them to fail. They believe the wrong cheerleaders. They don't believe the ones that want them to succeed. So when I say believe in the cheerleaders, list down who believes in you, who wants the best in you, whether you believe in God or not. Write their names down. Say, why write them down? As a reminder, where do you put that list? It may only be a few people, but that's okay. Put that list of names on your refrigerator door. It is the most opened and closed door in your house. It will remind you every day who's cheering for you, who loves you, who would hug you if they were in your kitchen. That's who you want to believe. So this is a mindset that prepares us for trauma. Believe the cheerleaders that want you to be successful. Second, believe the basketball. A basketball was made to bounce back up when you push it down. When you push it down harder, it will bounce back higher, unless you take air out of it. Unless you take that needle, stick it. I did this in a huge auditorium. It was so much fun, but the point was real. If you take air pressure out of the basketball, it will not bounce back up. And that's what we've done to a lot of people. We've reduced the pressure in their life because we think we're helping them, instead of increasing the pressure in their life to make them bounce back up, which is what God has created us to do. Resiliency, we call it in the psychological world. But bouncing back up is the story of so many people in the Old Testament, as you can see, and the New Testament. I mean, think about this for a minute. Why did God decide that the tribe of Judah would be the tribe of the Messiah? Judah wasn't a good man. Joseph was. And yet Joseph wasn't even listed as one of the 12. Didn't even have a parcel in Israel, but he was the good one. And so is Benjamin. But anyhow, we won't get into the depth of that. The point is, trust the basketball. You were made to bounce back up. That's why God gave you power, 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given us a spirit of timidity, which means puny soul, tiny souled, fearful, but one of power, dynamite. Dunamos is the Greek word. Dynamite, that when our fuse is lit, that which surrounds us changes. We have been put in places of pressure. Without pressure, you have no power. So when somebody says, I want to avoid all pressure, I want to avoid all stress, well then do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. Believe the basketball. And last, believe the rearview mirror. Every time you get in your car, no matter how expensive or cheap it is, no matter how old or new it is, no matter how many buttons it has, notice that the rearview mirror is 1/20th the size of the front windshield. That should tell us about counseling. It should tell us about our outlook on life. It should tell us about the biblical adage that when there is no vision, the people perish. When we make the rearview mirror bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're constantly looking behind us and constantly complaining about what's happened to us, we are shrinking our forward focus. You see, every day we should spend 1 minute looking backwards and 19 looking forward. Now, if you want to look sideways, which means you're comparing yourself, those are the 2 side view mirrors. All right, 3 minutes looking back and sideways, 17 minutes looking forward. Those of you who are counselors who might be listening, that means in a full hour, you should spend only about 10 minutes looking backwards with your client, with your patient. And the rest of those minutes, 50 minutes, looking forward. That's what God has created us to do, is constantly looking forward to give us opportunities to live for him. Believe the cheerleaders that believe in you, believe the basketball, you're going to bounce back up, and believe in the rearview mirror. You were made to move forward.
John, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Our time is coming to an end. We could talk with you for hours. We encourage our listeners and those viewing this program to purchase your book, Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences. It's a wonderful book. God bless you, John, for all you've done. God bless you and your family. And I hope many people will be assisted by this effort that you have. For those of you who continue to follow the Orthodox Christian Network, we thank you for your support. It means a great deal to us. Please watch for some new things that are coming up. There will be another OCN experience very soon, leaving for the Holy Land and for the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Please go to our website and tell your friends to do so as well. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.
And Father Chris, can we ask John to say where people can get in touch with him and follow him?
Of course. Please.
Sure. It's very easy. I have a website called HeymannConsulting.com. Heymann is HeyMann, HeymannConsulting.com. I have 2 Facebook pages. I have my personal one and I have a Heymann Consulting on there. In there, you'll see a link to a you'll see a link to a bunch of stuff, but you'll see an email address there. Again, the book, which you see right behind me, is called Agonizing Peace. I'm writing a second one called The Rugged Walk. It'll be a lot lighter than this one. This one is heavy, and the second one will be a little bit lighter, but you can order that through KharisPublishing.com.
Great. Very good. Thank you, everyone. God bless. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye now.